welcome to our online English class. In today's class, we are going to learn a play. The title of the play is Jane Eyre. The story is about a little girl named Jane Eyre. In this play, we could see how she faced many struggles in her life and how she attained victory in her life. Come on students, let's start learning now.
Charlotte Bronte was born on 21st April 1816 and died on 31st March 1855. She was an English novelist and poet. While her first novel, The Professor, was rejected by publishers, her second novel, Jane Eyre, was published in 1847. Come on, now let's see the characters of this play. Jane Eyre, she is the main character of this play. She is a 10-year-old girl. Both her parents are dead. She lives with her aunt and 3 cousins. Come on, now let's get introduced to her aunt Mrs. Reed's family. This is Mrs. Reed, Jane's aunt. She was very strict to Jane and she was very cruel towards her. Come on, now let's see her children. John, Eliza and Georgiana were Mrs. Reed's children. These children were also not kind to Jane. This is Bessy. She was the servant maid. She was kind to Jane and she always tries to protect Jane. Dear students, as we have seen the characters of the first scene, now let's start the chapter. Come on, listen carefully as I tell the story to you. The play starts with a conversation between Bessy and Jane. Bessy, the servant maid, advised Jane not to do any mischief that day. And Jane replied that she would not go down and disturb Aunt Reed. Bessy said that Jane should not fight with her cousins. Then Jane said that she would sit in the library and read books. While Jane was reading a book in the library, her cousins John, Georgiana and Eliza came there. Eliza scolded Jane for taking her father's book. She said that none of those books belonged to Jane. Then John picked up a fight with Jane. He called her to come near him. He pulled the book from her and insulted Jane that she has nothing in that house. She is a beggar. Then John threw the book on her and he went near her and grasped her hair and shoulders. He hit her with something. Immediately, 1 or 2 drops of blood from her head trickled down. Seeing this, Eliza screamed and Bessy and Mrs. Reed came running there. Mrs. Reed came there and she didn't ask what happened there. Instead, she got angry with Jane and she ordered Bessy to shut Jane in the red room. She didn't ask what happened there and what was the reason for the girl's blood on her forehead. She forced Bessy to shut her in the red room. Bessy brought Jane to the red room and left her there. Jenny collapsed on the floor and she started crying. Jane heard some noise and scream in the red room that made this little girl very scared. Little Jane was scared to stay in the room. She cried and she asked her aunt to open the door. But Mrs. Reed, she didn't open the door. When Jane woke up, she saw Bessy was sitting near her. Bessy said, "You have slept for a long time. Get up, it's dinner time." Then Jane asked her whether she was sick. Then Bessy said, "Yes, doctor came here and he checked you and he said you had fever. Bessy said that you are crying for a long time in the red room, that's why you have fainted there. Immediately, Jane said, No, 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 I saw Uncle read in the room. Immediately, Bessy said, Shh, don't talk anything, you sleep, I will sleep near you. After this incident, Mrs. Reed writes a letter to Mr. Brockhurst, who is running a school, Lowwood. He visits Gateshead. Jane is sent to Lowwood with him. The first scene ends here, and little Jane was sent to Lowwood School. Come on, students, let's see the next scene to know how was Jane's life in Lowwood School. That night, Jane reached Lowwood Institution. She was received by Miss Miller. Miss Miller took her inside. They crossed through a stone building, and Jane, she neither saw or heard any students. Then they met Miss Temple. Miss Temple said that Jane looked hungry, so she asked Miss Temple to give her food and make her sleep that night. Jane had her dinner and she went to sleep. Next day morning, Miss Miller took Jane to another room. That room was very noisy and many girls were there. One of the girls said that the water is frozen again. Then Miller said, remove the basins. Ask the monitors to remove the basins away. Miss Temple said this girl knew how to read and write, so let her be in grade 4. Jane was put in 4th standard. After lunch, all the girls were asked to go to the garden. In the garden, Jane met another girl named Helen. She was reading book and Jane sat near her and they started their conversation. From Helen, Jane came to know that was a school for orphans. Either one parent was not there, the children will be admitted in that school. It was a charity school, she said. Then she asked many questions. Finally, Helen said, today information is enough, and she started reading. Days passed. Spring season has started. Because of semi-starvation and neglected colds, most of the girls got sick in that school. And one among them was this Helen. One night, this Jane went to see Helen. She went to see Helen because she heard that Helen was sick. And Helen said goodbye to Jane. Jane couldn't understand why she was telling goodbye. And she asked her, where are you going? Helen said, I'm going to a place where it's very comfortable. That she was going to meet God. And she said good night. That night, this Helen died. The school improved. Jane spent 8 years in the school, 6 years as pupil and 2 years as teacher. Jane wanted liberty, so she applied to an institution and she received a letter from Mrs. Fairfax. Jane leaves Lowwood and goes to Thornfield. Now let's see how was Jane's life in Thornfield in the third scene. Main characters in the scene are Jane, Mrs. Fairfax and Miss Adela. Jane was received by Mrs. Fairfax at Thornfield. Jane thought she has come there to teach Mrs. Fairfax's daughter, but later from Mrs. Fairfax, Jane came to know that she has come to teach a little girl named Miss Adela. Adela's father's name was Mr. Rochester. Fairfax asked Jane to take rest on that day, and she said the next day she would introduce her to her student. Jane took rest and she slept well that night. She woke up early in the morning and she went to walk. When she went to walk, there she saw Miss Adela running up in the lawn, followed by her attendant Miss Verna. Mrs. Fairfax introduced Miss Adela to her new teacher Jane. Jane told her that she would teach her about nature, animals, and flowers. Jane promised Adela that she would teach her more about things which is not in the book too. The little Adela was very excited and she said that she likes to sing and dance too. Jane said that they could learn everything together. Now Jane started teaching Adela and led a new life in Thornsfield. I hope that Jane had a better life there. Our extract ends here today.
Dear students, I hope you understood today's story. How this Jane started her life in Gateshead. There she was ill-treated by her aunt and by her cousins. Then she went to a school in Lowwood. There she lost her close friend Helen. But she stayed there, she completed her studies there and she worked in that school for 2 years. Later, she went to Thornsfield. There she went to work and she started her career there teaching a little girl. And she led a happy life in Thornsfield. This was the story what we have read. I'm sure you would have all enjoyed the story. Now it's time to check your understanding. Today's homework is given on the board. Kindly write your homework and take a snapshot of your homework and send it to your respective teacher. With this note, I am winding up today's class. Thank you.